Hi everyone, this is Daniel from Uncharted Ways, and today we are building a canyon. Following the Uncharted Ways story, our characters are moving on inland from that beach where they were thrown, passing through a narrow desert canyon. Remember the tent and the well we made last week? Well, stay until the end to see where are we placing them. For making this canyon, we are gonna use again inexpensive materials. This is a diorama that can be made with a €10 budget. XPS foam, glue, some colors, and some tools that you probably own is all that you actually need for making this diorama. So stay tuned and follow the steps, because if watching this video is fun, doing the actual diorama is even more. As you probably figured out, I already showed you a picture of what are we aiming at. Yes, a canyon in a desert and arid area with narrow passes and hidden places. That's what we're aiming at. The first thing that we're gonna do, as always, is the base. You can use EPS or XPS foam, but I'm gonna use a plate of 3mm plywood because it's quite cheap and resilient. Being only 3mm thick, you can even use an utility knife to make it of your desired size. In this case, we're gonna make it 30 by 40. I'm just drawing on the base the general outline of the canyon, leaving the space for the narrow route where our characters will pass. I'm cutting the XPS foam plates and gluing them onto each other. If you're wondering why am I making those cuts on the foam before gluing, that's because white glue, and other types of glue too, cannot be absorbed by the foam, and therefore, if there are no crevices that it can fill, it won't work properly. As you see, I'm leaving some weights on top of it so it dries overnight. Before gluing it to the base, we need to cut the foam with the general shape, because it's gonna be much easier without the base. Also, because we wanna use nails to make sure nothing moves later on. Hey, unless you think you have too many, watch out those fingers. Fine. Now we can actually glue it to the base using some white glue. Being a narrow canyon, what we want to make, before going higher, we're gonna give shape to the lower parts. Otherwise, we risk making our lives too complicated later on. I'm gonna carve, with the help of a hot wire cutter, the shape that I want to give to the canyon. This is an inexpensive tool that you can find for less than €20, and that would really simplify the process of making clean cuts on the foam. Of course, you can still use a utility knife, but this is a faster and more efficient way to achieve the shapes that you want. Just keep in mind the importance of doing it in a ventilated area. When you use this tool, remember these two main things. First, don't push the wire. Go smoothly and it will do the cut. Second, it will cut the foam, but if there's glue or something else on its way, it might not work at all. As you see, I'm trying to make a concave shape on the rock. Simulated wind erosion because it will look good. As always in this stage, don't worry about nasty looks, because everything will be smooth later on. Now we're doing the other side of the canyon. We're starting by building up the walls with leftovers and chunks. It's important to reuse as many materials as we can. I'll be securing the biggest piece with the nails and some white glue, and once again I'll wait until it fully dries. I recommend you that you get the shape of the rock wall that you want before actually gluing it to the base, because it's so narrow that it will be nearly impossible to work your way around with an utility knife otherwise. Once it's fully dry, we can start giving some shape to the sides and the ground using modeling compound. You can use plaster, but this is much easier to work with and the finish looks better. It's very easy to make and not that expensive if you rather buy it. I'm doing it in 2 steps. First, the ground and some areas in the rock wall, and once that has dried a bit, I'll go over the edges of the cliff and certain parts to build a much smoother effect. If you do it all at once, you probably won't be able to make these concave shapes. Okay, so now that the compound is dry and that it has the shape that I wanted, my first impulse would be to build the bridge connecting these 2 areas. The problem is that the more we build, the more difficult will be to paint later on, as you can see. So I think I will continue building this whole area, and then I will prime it, and then I will paint it, and only then, only after all those things, I will actually build this crossing bridge. This means that I will have to repaint a bit some of these areas after building the bridge, but I guess that's fine. The next part of the diorama has next to no mystery. Cut the foam, glue the foam, let it dry. So because it's not creative or requires any further explanation, let me call my shadow clone to help me out. Hi man, what's up? Hi. Can you help me cut this? Why? I wanna do it fast so we can move on and finish the diorama even faster. Just do a montage, oh my god, I need to explain you everything. A what? Montage in. Wait, sorry guys, I got hyped. Let's try again. Fantastic. This is one of those times where chunks that you cut can be actually reused. Check how the parts that we cut with the hot wire cutter look. It's the perfect complement for blending the ground with the walls. I will put the base that I made for the tent and the wall already into the diorama, because now we can start building around, adding some compound to the foam for shaping it. I definitely need to find a cooler name for a compound. Grab it and little by little start adding it to all recesses and crevices. Because we're gonna add it to the rock wall and it's almost vertical, try not to mix the compound with too much water. Remember, the more water you add, the less consistency it will have, and the more it will take to harden. If you're worried about it drying too fast, remember that it's not super glue, it's not that fast, and anyway you can smooth it and shape it later on by adding some water while it's still wet. Just try to blend everything together. We could go on and start painting, but first I wanna add some sand. Not everywhere, because that's not the vibe that we wanna give. I'm thinking more in a rocky desert. And now that we got here, let me also show you my secret technique for removing the excess sand from the diorama. I named it the Tam Tam technique. We're just missing one small step to do with foam, and that is raising a bit the wall on the other side. I'm not doing anything different here than before, so let me fast forward and show you how it looks. We are going to work mostly with ochres, between browns and light yellows for painting the rocks. So I didn't want to start priming everything with a black. Nothing wrong with it though. So with a mix of 4 parts white, 1 part black, roughly, and one of my biggest and expensive brushes, I started priming it. There's a lot of surface to paint, so don't even try to do it with a small brush. Now that the structure of this secluded area is done, it's time to see how the tent and the well fit. I think it looks good, so now we can go on. Once we have primed everything, it's time to set the foundations of our main color. While I prepare all the materials, let me go on adding some cork rocks in very specific places, like a bonfire in front of the tent, and adding a bit more sand in those areas to blend everything together. And if you remember, in my video, I used mainly yellows and browns. So we're gonna set up a palette that goes from a brown to a very light ochre. And we're gonna do so using a combination of these three colors. The interest of trying to use the same colors in different proportions for our gradient lies upon color theory, which in a nutshell says that by using the same colors, it's gonna be a transition pleasant for the eye, because even if we don't realize of this, our brain will. Before we start painting, I'm gonna share with you a trick. I apologize right now for the lighting, but as you will see, it has a purpose. With this unappealing setup for a YouTube video, I'm going to be able to mark which are the areas that don't get direct light with my darker color, and also which are the ones that are actually reflecting the light. As you can see, I'm just adding the color without caring about blending or making it look good. I just want to know where my shadows and lights are, because then it will be much easier to go over it. Once the different areas are marked, we can turn on the light and go on painting the box with our guide in place. I know it might look weird right now, but this is one of those times when an ugly start will produce a nice outcome. Or so I hope. Try to paint always in the same direction and use a big brush. One important thing about painting is to learn when it's time for going quick and when you need to take care of details using a smaller brush. Of course, you can use a small brush everywhere, but by being inefficient, you risk getting tired and taking away the pleasure of doing it. So how to recognize when to go fast and when to go careful? Well, you could ask yourself, am I going to go over it adding another layer that will cover my current work at least partially? If the answer is yes, you probably shouldn't care too much about detail right now. So our prime colors are in place, and it's already obvious which parts we decided to give a darker color and which a lighter one. And that's great, but now we need to give coherence to the rock wall as a whole. And the best way to do it is by using a thin down paint over everything. I'm gonna use an airbrush to go faster, but of course the idea is the same. I know what you're thinking, like why not painting it properly from the beginning? Well, I guess you could, but even if it doesn't sound logic, these many layers is actually better and also faster. Alright, moving on to the next step. Washes. With a very watered down dark brown, I'm gonna go literally over everything. You really need to water it down. I didn't at first. Of course, it depends on the color that you want to achieve. So if you feel darker is better, don't water it down. When the wash was dry, it was already time for some highlighting. And because our rocks have a lot of edges, this is a very easy but yet time-consuming task. You cannot allow your brush to have too much paint because you'll ruin the effect, so a lot of back and forth with your kitchen paper to dry your brush. But it pays off. And yes, we finally got to the point where we need to make our rock bridge. So because we have to do all these steps of this diorama in a smaller scale, let me write down a summary for you. First, we get the shape that we want out of foam. Then, with the help of modeling compound, we blend it with the rest of the diorama. When it dries, we prime it with gray. After that, with the help of watered down white glue, we add some sand that we secure with yet some more glue. The next step requires a really long brush to go under the bridge, and we use our browns and ochres to paint this part. Of course, we give it a wash, and then we can finally highlight it. And what's left? I appreciate you asking. Details. So, our friend the popsicle for the extinguished bonfire, some rope for simulating dry fog in some places, and some sticks and rope to hold the tent. It wouldn't feel real otherwise. And that's it, we can finally reveal the desert canyon where our characters passed on their journey inland. If you like our videos, please consider subscribing. It will help us a lot to grow and release better videos. And remember, it wasn't just plaster, it was also a canyon.